Go ahead, my daughter-in-law said, smiling as she slid the pen across the table. Sign it. It's the last thing standing between you and peace. They were already pouring champagne before the ink had even dried. I remember thinking how quickly people celebrate when they believe they've won. The conference room was too bright for a morning like that, sunlight spilling across the polished wood table as if it had no idea what was about to unfold. I sat at the end of it, hands folded neatly in my lap, the pen resting between my fingers, and for a moment, I simply listened. The quiet hum of the air conditioner. The soft clink of glass as Daniel reached for a bottle he had no right to open yet. The faint rustle of papers as Mr. Blake organized the documents in front of him. Everything felt rehearsed. Too smooth. Too certain. Olivia stood to my right, her hand lightly touching Daniel's shoulder, her nails perfectly manicured, her smile even more so. She had always been good at that, smiling as if nothing in the world could surprise her, as if every outcome had already been calculated and approved. Daniel wouldn't look at me. Not once. He kept his eyes on the table, on the documents, on anything but my face. That, more than anything, told me what I needed to know. My son had never been a good liar. Not when he was 6, sneaking cookies before dinner. Not when he was 16, trying to hide a dent in the car. And certainly not now, sitting across from his mother while pretending this was just another routine decision. It's straightforward, Olivia continued, her voice light, almost comforting. You won't have to worry about maintenance, taxes, any of that anymore. We'll take care of everything. You deserve to rest. Rest. That was the word she chose. Not leave. Not surrender. Not step aside. Just rest. As if this house, this life, this legacy, had been some kind of burden I was finally being relieved of. I nodded slowly, as if I agreed. As if I hadn't spent the last 35 years building that house with my husband, room by room, paycheck by paycheck. As if I hadn't memorized every corner, every creak in the floorboards, every scratch on the kitchen counter where Daniel used to do his homework. As if I didn't know exactly what I was signing away. Mr. Blake cleared his throat gently. Mrs. Collins, if you're ready, you can sign here. He turned the document toward me, his expression neutral, professional, unreadable. A good lawyer never shows too much. I picked up the pen. It felt heavier than it should have. Or maybe that was just the moment pressing down on it. Olivia leaned in slightly. I could smell her perfume, something expensive, something sharp. It's the right decision, she said softly. For everyone. For everyone. I almost smiled at that. Because everyone, in her world, had never included me. I lowered the pen to the paper. For a brief second, the tip hovered there, just above my name. Margaret Collins. I had written that name thousands of times over the years. On checks. On school forms. On birthday cards. On hospital paperwork the night my husband passed, when my hands wouldn't stop shaking but I signed anyway because someone had to. This time, my hand was perfectly steady. I signed. Slowly. Deliberately. Each letter clear and precise. No hesitation. No tremor. No sign of doubt. When I finished, I placed the pen down exactly where Olivia had set it. The room shifted immediately. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Daniel exhaled, a breath he had been holding for far too long. Olivia's smile widened, just a fraction, but enough. She straightened, her hand leaving his shoulder as if the performance was over. Well, she said, clapping her hands lightly together, that's done. Done. Such a simple word for something so final. Daniel reached for the champagne then, his movements suddenly more confident, more relaxed. He didn't ask. He didn't wait. He just poured. The soft pop of the cork echoed louder than it should have, bouncing off the walls of the conference room. Glasses were filled. One for Olivia. One for Daniel. One even placed near me, though no one actually looked to see if I would take it. I didn't. I kept my hands folded in my lap, just as they had been before. To new beginnings, Olivia said, lifting her glass. Daniel nodded, raising his own. To new beginnings. Their voices overlapped, light and easy, as if they were celebrating a promotion or a vacation, not the quiet transfer of everything I had ever worked for. I watched them. Not with anger. Not with sadness. Just watching. The way you watch a storm from behind a window, knowing it's coming, knowing there's nothing left to do but let it pass. Because the truth is, by the time they were celebrating, the real decision had already been made. Not in that room. Not on that paper. Not in that moment. It had been made days earlier, in a much quieter place, with far less certainty on their side of the table. But they didn't know that. They thought the story ended with my signature. They thought the pen in my hand was the final move. They thought they had won. I could see it in the way Olivia held her glass, in the way Daniel finally leaned back in his chair, in the way the tension drained from their faces all at once. Victory has a look. And they were wearing it. I let the silence stretch just a little longer than it should have. Long enough for their celebration to settle into the room. Long enough for them to believe it was real. Then, just as Olivia began to speak again, already planning what came next, Mr. Blake did something very small. He adjusted the papers in front of him. Cleared his throat. And said, in a voice so calm it almost disappeared into the air, "Before we conclude, there is one more clause we need to review." That was the moment the room changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a shift. A pause. The kind of pause that doesn't make sense until it's too late. Olivia's smile faltered, just for a second. Daniel's hand froze halfway to his glass. And I remained exactly where I was, hands folded, back straight, eyes steady. Because for the first time that morning, everything was finally happening exactly the way it was supposed to. Mr. Blake did not raise his voice, and yet every sound in that room seemed to fall away the moment he spoke. The soft clink of glass stopped. The air itself felt thinner, as if something unseen had just entered the space between us. Olivia was the first to recover, though it was only partial. Her smile returned, but not quite the same. There was a question behind it now, something cautious, something calculating. "I am sorry," she said lightly, tilting her head just enough to suggest polite confusion. "I thought we had covered everything." Mr. Blake did not look at her. He kept his attention on the documents, one hand resting calmly on the final page as if it had been waiting there the entire time. "We have covered the primary agreement," he replied, his tone measured, professional. "However, there is an additional clause that becomes relevant once the document is signed." Daniel shifted in his chair. It was a small movement, but I noticed. I always noticed when he was uncomfortable. He had done the same thing as a boy when he knew he had missed something important. "What kind of clause?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but there was a tightness in his voice now. Mr. Blake finally looked up, his gaze moving from Daniel to Olivia, then briefly to me before returning to the page. "A protective provision," he said. "Included by the original estate holder." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Olivia's fingers tightened slightly around her glass. Daniel set his down without taking a sip. "I am not sure I understand," Olivia said, her tone still controlled, but the warmth had drained from it. "The property transfer is complete, is it not?" Mr. Blake gave a small nod. "The transfer has been initiated, yes. However, the ownership structure tied to the estate remains subject to conditions outlined in the trust." The word trust hung in the air like something heavier than the rest. Olivia blinked. Just once. "What trust?" she asked. It was subtle, but there it was. The first crack. I leaned back slightly in my chair, not enough to draw attention, just enough to ease the tension in my shoulders. I had been sitting very still for a long time. Mr. Blake turned another page, the sound of paper sliding against paper louder than it should have been. "The Collins Family Trust," he said. Established approximately 12 years ago. Daniel frowned. That is not possible, he said quickly. My father never mentioned anything about a trust. I watched his face as he spoke. The confusion was real. That much was true. He had not known. Olivia, however, did not respond immediately. Her silence was different. Not confusion. Calculation. Perhaps, she said slowly, there is some misunderstanding. We reviewed all relevant documents before today. Mr. Blake inclined his head slightly. I have no doubt that you reviewed the documents available to you, he said. However, the trust was not structured as a standard disclosure asset. It was designed to activate under specific circumstances. He paused, just long enough for the meaning to settle. Such as this one. The room felt smaller then. Not physically, but in the way tension narrows space, pulls everything inward until there is no room left to move. Daniel looked at Olivia. Olivia looked at Mr. Blake. And I sat quietly, my hands still folded, my expression unchanged. Activate how? Daniel asked. Mr. Blake placed his hand flat on the page. The trust retains controlling interest over the property, regardless of transfer signatures, until all conditions are satisfied. Olivia let out a soft, incredulous laugh. It was the kind of laugh people use when they think something is too absurd to be real. That does not make any sense, she said. If she signed the documents, then the house is ours. That is how this works. Mr. Blake did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply turned the document toward them and tapped a specific paragraph with his finger. This is how it works, he said calmly. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes scanning the text. Olivia followed, her shoulder brushing his as she tried to read over him. I watched them both. The way their expressions shifted. The way certainty gave way to something else. Something slower. Something heavier. What does that mean? Daniel asked after a moment, his voice quieter now. Mr. Blake answered without hesitation. It means that while the transfer has been signed, the authority over the property does not pass to you unless the trustee confirms the conditions have been met. Olivia straightened. And who exactly is the trustee? She asked. Her voice was sharp now. Not loud, but precise. Focused. Mr. Blake did not look at the document this time. He looked directly at me. Mrs. Collins, he said, is the acting trustee. Silence. Not the quiet from before. This was different. This was the kind of silence that fills a room completely, leaving no space for anything else. Daniel turned toward me slowly, as if the movement itself required effort. Mom, he said, the word uncertain, unfamiliar. Olivia did not speak. She simply stared, her expression tightening in a way that no longer tried to hide anything. I met her gaze, calm, steady. The same way I had met it all morning. The same way I had met it when she handed me the pen. I did not smile. I did not need to. There must be some mistake, Daniel said quickly, looking back at Mr. Blake. She just signed everything. That means she gave up control. Mr. Blake shook his head slightly. She signed the transfer, he said. She did not relinquish her authority as trustee. Olivia set her glass down a little too hard. The sound echoed across the table. Then what was the point of this, she demanded, her composure finally slipping at the edges. Why go through all of this if nothing changes? Mr. Blake folded his hands neatly on the table. Things have changed, he said. The structure is now fully active. He let that sit for a moment before continuing. Which means any further decisions regarding the property, including occupancy, sale, or financial use, require the explicit approval of the trustee. He did not look at them when he said the last word. He did not need to. They already knew. Daniel's face had gone pale. Olivia's eyes flicked toward me again, searching, measuring, trying to understand something she had not anticipated. I remained exactly where I was. Calm. Still. Unmoved. Because the truth was, nothing in that moment surprised me. Not their confusion. Not their frustration. Not even the way the room had turned against them so quickly. The only thing that had changed was that they were finally seeing a part of the story they had never considered. And for the first time that morning, they were no longer celebrating. No one reached for the champagne after that. The glasses remained where they were, half full, catching the light but untouched, like something that no longer belonged to the moment. Daniel leaned back slowly, his hands resting on the arms of his chair as if he needed something solid to hold on to. He looked at me again, this time longer, searching for something familiar, something he could still recognize. "Mom," he said, and there was something different in the way he said it now, less certain, less assured. "Why did you not tell me about any of this?" I did not answer right away. I let the question sit in the space between us, not because I needed time to think, but because I wanted him to hear it for what it really was. Not a question. A realization. Olivia, however, did not wait. "This is not acceptable," she said, her voice firm, controlled, but sharper than before. "We came here in good faith. We followed the process. If there was a trust, it should have been disclosed clearly before any signatures were requested." Mr. Blake remained calm, his posture unchanged. "The trust was properly documented and legally recorded," he replied. "Its activation conditions are outlined within its own framework. There is no requirement for preemptive disclosure beyond what has been provided." Olivia's jaw tightened. "That sounds like a technical loophole," she said. "It sounds like something designed to mislead." Mr. Blake did not react to the accusation. "It is designed to protect," he said simply. The word landed differently this time. Protect. Daniel frowned again, his confusion deepening into something heavier. "Protect from what?" he asked. Mr. Blake's gaze shifted briefly toward me, then back to Daniel. "From decisions made under pressure," he said. "From circumstances that may not fully reflect the long-term interests of the estate." Olivia let out a quiet breath through her nose, a sound that was almost a laugh but not quite. "So now you are implying that we pressured her?" she asked. "That is a serious accusation." "I am not implying anything," Mr. Blake said. "I am explaining the purpose of the structure that was put in place." Silence followed again, but this time it was different. Not confusion. Not shock. Something closer to tension settling into its final shape. Daniel rubbed his hands together, a habit he had picked up years ago when he was trying to process too many things at once. "So what happens now?" he asked. Mr. Blake answered without hesitation. "Now, any further actions regarding the property require approval from the trustee." He paused briefly. "Which means Mrs. Collins." Daniel looked at me again. This time, there was no confusion in his expression. Only something quieter. Something more uncertain. "Are you going to approve it?" he asked. I met his gaze. Calm. Steady. The same way I had met it when he was a child asking for permission, the same way I had met it when he stood at the front door the day he moved out, promising he would visit every week. "Approve what?" I asked gently. The question was simple, but it stopped him. Because there was no single answer. Not anymore. Olivia stepped forward then, her composure returning in a different form. More direct. Less polished. "The transfer," she said. "The house. The arrangement we agreed on." I turned my head slightly to look at her. Really look at her. Not the way I had before, not through the lens of politeness or patience or family obligation. Just clearly. "Agreed on?" I repeated softly. Her expression flickered, just for a moment. "You signed the documents," she said. "That is an agreement." I nodded once. "I signed the transfer," I said. "That is not the same thing." The distinction settled heavily between us. Daniel shifted again. "Mom, we talked about this," he said, his voice quieter now, almost careful. You said it was too much for you. The house, the maintenance, everything. You said you were tired. I listened to him. I let him finish. And then I nodded again, slowly. I said I was tired, I agreed. I did not say I was finished. The difference was small. But it changed everything. Olivia crossed her arms, her posture tightening. This is not reasonable, she said. We have already made plans based on this transition. Contractors, timelines, financial arrangements. You cannot just change your mind now. I held her gaze. I have not changed my mind, I said. I have simply not given it away. Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping just slightly as if the weight of the situation had finally settled on him. Then what do you want? He asked. It was not an accusation. Not anymore. It was something else. A question that he had not asked in a long time. I did not answer immediately. Not because I did not know, but because I wanted to be sure he understood the moment we were in. This was not about the house. Not really. It never had been. I looked at the table, at the documents, at the untouched champagne, and then back at him. I want to understand why you thought this was the only way, I said. The room went quiet again. Not tense. Not sharp. Just quiet. Because that question did not have a quick answer. Olivia opened her mouth, ready to respond, but Daniel raised his hand slightly, stopping her. He kept his eyes on me. We thought it would be easier, he said after a moment. For everyone. I nodded once more. Easier, I repeated. And. Then I leaned back in my chair, just slightly, the same way I had at the beginning. Calm. Unhurried. Sometimes, I said quietly, easy is just another word for convenient. No one spoke after that. Not right away. Because the truth, when it is finally said out loud, does not need to be repeated. It just stays there, filling the space, waiting to see what comes next. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, slowly, like something settling into place after being disturbed. Olivia was the first to move, but this time there was no performance in it. No polished smile. No carefully chosen tone. She reached for the documents again, flipping through the pages with sharper movements, as if the answers might rearrange themselves if she looked closely enough. This is not over, she said, more to the table than to anyone in particular. There has to be a way to finalize this. Mr. Blake did not respond immediately. He allowed her words to pass through the room without interruption, the same way he had allowed everything else to unfold. Daniel remained still, his attention no longer divided. He was looking at me now, not the documents, not Olivia, just me. And in that look, there was something I had not seen in a long time. Not confusion. Not frustration. Something closer to recognition. Mom, he said again, quieter this time, when did all of this happen? It was a different question from before. Not why did you not tell me? Not what is going on. But when? When did the story change without him noticing? I considered the question, not because I needed to find an answer, but because I needed to decide how much of it he was ready to hear. It did not happen all at once, I said. It rarely does. Olivia let out a short breath, closing the folder with more force than necessary. We do not have time for this, she said. We have already invested in the next phase. We have commitments. I turned my head slightly toward her. Commitments, I repeated. Yes, she said firmly. Financial ones. Structural ones. Plans that were made based on a clear understanding. I nodded slowly. An understanding, I said, or an assumption? She did not answer that. Not directly. Instead, she looked back at Mr. Blake. If the trust requires approval, then. We will request approval, she said. Formally. Immediately. Mr. Blake inclined his head slightly. You are welcome to submit a request, he said. The trustee will review it accordingly. Olivia's eyes flicked toward me again. There was no smile now. Only focus. Then consider this the beginning of that process, she said. We are requesting full transfer authority. I met her gaze. Calm. Unhurried. On what grounds? I asked. The question was simple, but it stopped her again. Because this time, there was no prepared answer. Daniel shifted forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table, his hands clasped together. We thought it was the next step, he said, choosing his words carefully. You said you were tired. You said you did not want to handle everything anymore. We were trying to help. I listened to him. I let the words settle. Help, I repeated softly. Yes, he said. Take some of the pressure off you. Make things easier. I nodded once. And in making things easier, I said, you decided it would be easier if I stepped aside completely. He hesitated. Just for a moment. We thought it made sense, he said. For the future. The future. That word again. Always just far enough away to justify the present. I leaned back slightly, my hands still resting in my lap. Your father used to say something about the future, I said quietly. Daniel's expression shifted again at the mention of him. He used to say that people talk about the future when they want something today. Olivia did not react to the words themselves. She reacted to the direction they were pointing. With all due respect, she said, her tone tightening again, this is not about philosophy. This is about practical decisions. The house is too large. The upkeep is expensive. The property taxes alone are, I know exactly what they are, I said gently, interrupting her without raising my voice. She stopped. Not because I had spoken loudly, but because I had not. I had been paying them for over 3 decades, I continued. I know what it costs. I know what it takes. Daniel looked down at the table. Olivia's lips pressed together, her argument paused mid-thought. I let the silence stretch again, just long enough for the weight of that truth to settle between us. This house, I said, was never just a property. It was a life. One that your father and I built together, piece by piece. Not because it was easy. But because it mattered. Daniel's hands tightened slightly, his fingers interlocking more firmly. I know that, he said quietly. Do you? I asked, not harshly, not accusingly, just simply. The question hung there, unanswered. Olivia shifted her weight, her patience thinning. Sentiment does not change the facts, she said. The numbers are the numbers. I turned to her again. And yet, I said, you are not asking about the numbers. You are asking for control. That landed exactly where it needed to. She did not deny it. She did not confirm it. She simply held my gaze, her expression now completely stripped of pretense. Control allows us to manage things properly, she said. It allows us to make decisions efficiently. Efficiently, I repeated. Yes, she said. Without unnecessary delays. I nodded slowly. Without asking, I said. That was the difference. And now it was out in the open. Daniel looked between us, the space narrowing again, but in a different way this time. Not confusion. Not shock. Understanding. Slow, uncomfortable, but undeniable. We should have talked to you more, he said after a moment. It was not an apology. Not yet. But it was closer than anything he had said so far. I met his eyes again. You should have listened, I said. He nodded once. A small movement. But real. Olivia exhaled sharply, stepping back from the table. This is going nowhere, she said. We are circling the same points. Mr. Blake remained composed, his hands folded neatly in front of him. Not necessarily, he said. Clarity often takes time. Olivia looked at him, then at me, then back at the documents. For the first time since we sat down, she did not have a next move ready. And in that moment, the balance of the room shifted again. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just enough. Enough for everyone to feel it. Enough for everyone to understand that whatever they thought had ended with a signature had only just begun. Olivia did not sit back down. She remained standing, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, as if she needed that point of contact to steady herself. The confidence she had walked in with had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. It was sharper now. Less certain. More deliberate. Fine, she said after a moment, her voice even again, though the edge had not fully faded. If this is about process, then we will follow the process. She turned slightly toward Mr. Blake. What exactly does the trustee require in order to approve the transfer? Mr. Blake did not rush to answer. He reached for a separate folder, thinner than the others, and opened it with the same measured precision he had shown all morning. The trust outlines several evaluation criteria, he said. Financial stability, long-term sustainability, and the preservation of the property's intended purpose. Olivia frowned slightly. Intended purpose, she repeated. Mr. Blake nodded. The trust was established with specific language regarding the use of the property, he said. It is not solely a financial asset. It is designated as a residential estate with generational continuity in mind. The words landed differently this time. Not as abstract legal terms, but as something more concrete. Something that could not be easily adjusted or reinterpreted. Daniel looked up from the table, his expression tightening as he tried to follow. What does that mean in plain terms? He asked. Mr. Blake closed the folder gently. It means the property is not intended to be treated as a transactional asset, he said. It is meant to remain within the family structure under conditions that align with its original purpose. Olivia let out a quiet breath, her patience thinning again. We are the family, she said. We are not outsiders trying to exploit anything. We are trying to move forward. I watched her carefully. The way she emphasized the word family. The way she positioned herself within it. Forward, I repeated softly. Yes, she said, meeting my gaze directly. Forward. With clarity. With stability. With a plan. I nodded once. And where, exactly, do I fit into that plan? The question settled heavily between us. Olivia did not answer immediately. For the first time, she seemed to weigh her response more carefully, as if she understood that whatever she said next would not be easily undone. You would be taken care of, she said finally. We would make sure you had everything you needed. The phrasing was precise. Careful. And yet, it said everything it needed to. Daniel shifted again, his eyes flicking toward me, then back to her. Olivia, he said quietly, but she did not look at him. She kept her focus on me. It would be easier, she continued, if we could manage things centrally. One decision point. One direction. That is how these transitions work. I let her finish. I let every word settle. These transitions, I said slowly, are not transactions. She did not respond to that. Instead, she turned back to Mr. Blake. What documentation is required? She asked. We are prepared to submit whatever is necessary. Mr. Blake folded his hands again, his posture unchanged. A formal proposal, he said. Including financial projections, intended use, and a detailed outline of how the property will be maintained in accordance with the trust's objectives. Olivia nodded once. We can provide that, she said. Within a week. That would be appropriate, Mr. Blake replied. Daniel looked between them, then back at me. And until then, he asked. Mr. Blake answered without hesitation. The current arrangement remains unchanged, he said. Mrs. Collins retains full authority as trustee, and no modifications to ownership or occupancy may occur without her approval. The word occupancy seemed to land harder than the rest. Olivia's eyes narrowed slightly. Occupancy, she repeated. Mr. Blake inclined his head. The trust includes provisions regarding residency, he said. Any changes to who resides in the property must be approved by the trustee. Olivia's hand tightened slightly on the edge of the table. We already live there, she said. Yes, Mr. Blake said calmly. Under the current arrangement. He paused briefly. Which remains subject to review. That was the moment something shifted again. Not in the room, but in Olivia. The realization was not immediate, but it was there. The understanding that the position she thought was secure was, in fact, conditional. That the control she believed she had already obtained was still, in every meaningful way, out of reach. Daniel saw it too. I could tell by the way he straightened slightly, his attention sharpening. Are you saying that could change? He asked. Mr. Blake met his gaze. I am saying that all aspects of the arrangement are subject to the trustee's discretion, he replied. Silence followed. Not heavy. Not tense. Just, clear. Clear in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. Olivia stepped back from the table then, her posture shifting as she processed the information. This is more complicated than we were led to believe, she said, her tone controlled again, but quieter. It often is, Mr. Blake said. I watched them both. The way they stood. The way they looked at the documents now, not with certainty, but with caution. The way the energy in the room had changed from assumption to awareness. Daniel turned to me again, his expression softer than before. Mom, he said, what do you want to do? It was the second time he had asked that question. But this time, it was different. There was no expectation behind it. No assumption. Just the question itself. I considered him for a moment. Really considered him. Not as the man sitting across from me, but as the boy he had been, the one who used to ask the same question in different ways, looking for direction, for reassurance, for something steady to hold on to. I am not in a hurry, I said finally. My voice was calm. Even. Certain. Olivia exhaled slowly, her gaze shifting away from me for the first time in several minutes. Daniel nodded once, absorbing the answer. And in that moment, something subtle but undeniable settled over the room. Not resolution. Not yet. But the quiet understanding that whatever came next would not be decided in a single meeting, or a single signature, or a single assumption. It would take time. And for the first time that morning, time was no longer on their side. No one stood up right away. The meeting had not officially ended, but it had already shifted into something else entirely. The documents were no longer the center of attention. The signatures, the clauses, the technicalities, they had all done their work. What remained was quieter. More personal. Daniel was the first to break the stillness, though not with words. He reached for the champagne glass in front of him, then paused halfway, as if he had forgotten why it was there in the first place. Slowly, he set it back down without taking a sip. Olivia noticed. I saw it in the way her eyes flicked toward him, just for a second, measuring, adjusting. She was recalculating. She always did. We should get started on the proposal, she said, her tone steady again, but softer now, less performative. There is no reason to delay. Mr. Blake gave a small nod. That would be advisable, he said. A thorough submission will make the review process more efficient. Olivia glanced at me. And how long does the review process typically take? She asked. Mr. Blake turned his attention toward me, but did not answer for me. He never did. That was not his role. I let the question sit for a moment, not out of hesitation, but out of intention. As long as it needs to, I said. My voice was calm. Even. Final in a way that did not need emphasis. Olivia's lips pressed together slightly. We would appreciate a reasonable timeline, she said. We have already begun coordinating next steps. I nodded once. Then you should continue coordinating, I replied. Just not assuming. The distinction was small, but it landed exactly where it needed to. Daniel looked down at his hands again, his fingers loosely intertwined. We did assume, he said quietly. Olivia did not respond to that. Not directly. Instead, she reached for her bag, sliding the folder inside with careful precision, as if restoring order to something that had slipped out of place. We will prepare the documentation, she said, more to herself than to anyone else. We will present a clear plan. Mr. Blake closed his own folder, aligning the edges neatly. That would be the appropriate next step, he said. The room settled again, but this time it was different. Not tense. Not uncertain. Just quieter. The kind of quiet that comes after something has been clarified, even if not resolved. Daniel finally looked up at me again. Can we talk later? He asked. The question was simple, but there was something behind it. Not urgency. Not pressure. Just a request. I held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. We can talk, I said. Olivia straightened, her posture returning to something closer to what it had been at the beginning, though not quite the same. The certainty was gone. In its place was something more measured. We will be in touch, she said. It was not a threat. Not a promise. Just a statement. I inclined my head slightly. I am sure you will. Mr. Blake stood then, signaling the natural end of the meeting. If there are no further questions, he said, we can conclude for today. No one spoke. There were no further questions. Not because everything had been answered, but because the answers that mattered would not be found in that room. Olivia moved first, stepping away from the table, her heels making a soft, steady sound against the floor. Daniel followed, more slowly, his movements less certain, as if he were still adjusting to the shift that had taken place. I remained seated for a moment longer, not out of reluctance, but out of habit. I had learned, over the years, that leaving too quickly often meant leaving something behind. And I had no intention of doing that again. When I finally stood, the room felt different. Not smaller. Not larger. Just clearer. The sunlight still stretched across the table, the same way it had when we arrived, but it no longer felt out of place. It felt neutral. As if it had been waiting for everything else to settle. Olivia reached the door first, pausing just long enough to glance back. Not at the documents. Not at Mr. Blake. At me. Her expression was composed, but there was something new beneath it. Not defeat. Not acceptance. Something more complex. Something unfinished. Daniel lingered a step behind her. I will call you, he said. I nodded. I will answer, I replied. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod in return, then turned toward the door. They left together. The door closed softly behind them, the sound barely noticeable, but final enough to mark the end of that chapter. Mr. Blake remained where he was, gathering the remaining papers with the same careful precision he had shown all morning. You handled that well, he said after a moment. I looked at him, then at the empty chairs across the table. I did what was necessary, I said. He gave a small nod. Most people would have reacted differently, he said. Most people would have said more. I allowed a faint, almost invisible smile to touch the corner of my lips. Saying less leaves more room for the truth to appear, I said. He considered that for a moment, then nodded again. That it does. I reached for my purse, lifting it from the chair beside me, the familiar weight grounding in a way that felt both ordinary and important. What happens next? I asked. Mr. Blake closed the final folder and set it aside. Now we wait, he said. And we see what they choose to show you. I nodded once. And if what they show is not enough? He met my gaze, his expression steady. Then you will already know what to do. I did not respond to that. I did not need to. Some decisions are not made in the moment. They are made long before, quietly, without announcement, waiting for the right time to be revealed. I turned toward the door, my hand resting briefly on the handle before I opened it. The hallway beyond was quiet, the same as it had been when we arrived, but it felt different now. Not because anything had changed, but because I had. And as I stepped out, leaving the conference room behind me, I understood something with a clarity that did not require explanation. They had come expecting an ending. What they had found instead was a beginning. And this time, I was the one deciding how the story would move forward. The hallway outside the conference room felt unusually long, as if each step carried more weight than the last. My heels made a quiet, steady rhythm against the polished floor, the sound echoing just enough to remind me that I was alone now. Not abandoned. Not pushed aside. Just alone in a way that felt deliberate, chosen. I pressed the elevator button and waited, my reflection faintly visible in the brushed metal doors. For a moment, I studied it. The silver in my hair. The lines around my eyes. The stillness in my expression. I did not look defeated. I did not look victorious either. I looked certain. The doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped inside, turning to face the mirrored wall as the elevator began its descent. Floors passed quietly, numbers lighting up and disappearing one by one. I did not rush. There was no reason to. By the time I reached the lobby, the world outside the building had not changed. Cars moved. People crossed the street. Conversations continued in low, passing tones. Everything was exactly as it had been before. And yet, nothing felt the same. I stepped outside, the cool air brushing lightly against my face, carrying with it the faint scent of early afternoon. My car was parked just across the street. I did not go to it immediately. Instead, I paused near the curb, watching the traffic for a moment longer than necessary. Because sometimes, clarity does not arrive in a single moment. It unfolds, slowly, as everything else continues around it. My phone vibrated in my purse. I did not need to look at it to know who it was. Daniel had always been predictable in that way. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I reached in and answered. "Hello," I said, my voice calm, steady, unchanged. There was a pause on the other end, brief but noticeable. "Mom," he said. The word carried more weight now. Less assumption. More awareness. "Did you make it outside?" "I did," I replied. "I am standing just across the street." Another pause. I could hear him breathing, the faint background noise of the building behind him. "Can we talk?" he asked. The question was the same as before, but the tone was different. Softer. Careful. I glanced at the traffic light as it shifted from red to green. "We are already talking," I said gently. He let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh but not quite. "I mean really talk," he said. "Not like that." I understood what he meant. He was not asking about the documents. Not about the trust. Not about the house. He was asking about everything that had led to that room. "All right," I said. "Then say what you need to say." There was a longer pause this time. Long enough that I wondered if he might not say anything at all. "I did not know," he said finally. The words came out slowly, as if he had been holding them back for some time. "About the trust. About any of it. I swear, I did not know." I listened. Not to respond. Just to hear. "I believe you," I said. Because I did. That had never been the question. "Then why does it feel like I am the one who did something wrong?" he asked. The question was honest. Unpolished. The kind of question people ask when they are beginning to see something they had missed before. I looked out at the street again, watching as a car slowed to make a turn, its signal blinking steadily. "Because you were part of it," I said. Not harsh. Not accusing. Just true. He did not respond right away. I could hear him thinking, the quiet shift of perspective happening in real time. "I thought we were helping," he said after a moment. "I thought you needed us to step in." I nodded slightly, even though he could not see me. "You thought I needed to be replaced," I said. The words were simple, but they landed exactly where they needed to. "No," he said quickly. "That is not what I meant." "It is what happened," I replied. Silence followed. Not defensive. Not resistant. Just processing. "I did not see it like that," he said quietly. "I know," I said. And I did. That was the difference between intention and impact. Between what people believe they are doing and what they are actually doing. "Olivia said it would be easier if we handled everything," he continued. "She said it would take the pressure off you. That you deserve to relax." I let the words settle before responding. "And did you ever ask me what I wanted?" I asked. He did not answer. He did not need to. The silence was enough. "I thought I knew," he said finally. "You thought you knew," I repeated. "That is not the same thing." A car horn sounded faintly in the distance, sharp but brief, then gone. Life continuing, uninterrupted. "So what happens now?" he asked. The question had changed again. Not what do we do? Not how do we fix this? Just, what happens now? I considered it for a moment. Not because I did not have an answer, but because I wanted to be sure he understood what it meant. "Now," I said, "you show me who you are without assumptions." He was quiet for a long moment. "And if I do that?" he asked. "Then I will decide what comes next," I replied. There was no hesitation in my voice. No uncertainty. Just clarity. "That sounds final," he said. "It is honest," I answered. Another pause. Then, softer, "Can I come by tonight?" I looked at the street again, the lights shifting once more, people moving through the crosswalk in quiet patterns. "You can come by," I said. "But do not come with a plan." "Okay," he said. And for the first time in the conversation, there was something steady in his voice. Not confidence. Not certainty. Just willingness. "I will be there," he added. "I will be home," I replied. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my purse. For a moment, I stood there, exactly where I had been before. The same street. The same air. The same passing cars. And yet, everything had shifted. Not because something had been taken from me, but because something had been made clear. I crossed the street slowly, not rushing, not hesitating. Just moving forward. Because whatever came next would not be decided by documents or signatures or assumptions. It would be decided by something much simpler. By what people chose to show when there was nothing left to hide. The house was quiet when I walked in, the kind of quiet that did not feel empty, but settled, like something that had been waiting patiently. I set my keys down on the small table by the door, the same place I had set them for years, the same soft sound marking my return. Nothing had changed. Not the arrangement of the furniture. Not the faint scent of wood polish in the air. Not the way the afternoon light stretched across the living room floor, touching the edges of the rug my husband and I had chosen together decades ago. And yet, I noticed everything more clearly now. Every detail felt sharper, as if I were seeing it not just as a home, but as something that had almost been taken from me without my voice. I moved slowly through the space, not out of hesitation, but out of intention. The kitchen. The hallway. The staircase. Each step deliberate, each glance a quiet acknowledgement of what remained mine, not because I had held onto it tightly, but because I had refused to let it go without understanding why. I reached the kitchen and paused, resting my hand lightly against the counter. For a moment, I simply stood there, listening. The faint hum of the refrigerator. The distant sound of a car passing outside. The steady rhythm of a place that had always been more than just a structure. I opened the cabinet and took out a glass, filling it with water from the sink. Simple. Familiar. Grounding. As I set the glass down, my phone vibrated again on the counter. This time, I looked at the screen before answering. Olivia. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I picked it up. Hello, I said, my voice the same as it had been all day. Calm. Even. There was no pause on her end. We need to talk, she said immediately. Direct. Controlled. I leaned lightly against the counter. You already said that, I replied. A brief silence followed. Not uncertainty. Adjustment. I would prefer to speak in person, she said. This is not something that should be handled over the phone. I considered that for a moment. Not because I needed to decide, but because I wanted to understand what she was really asking. You can come by this evening, I said. Daniel will be here. Another pause. Slightly longer this time. All right, she said. We will be there. The call ended without anything further. No pleasantries. No attempts to soften the edges. Just a clear understanding that the next conversation would not be like the one before. I set the phone down and picked up the glass of water, taking a slow sip. The house remained quiet, unchanged by the brief exchange. I moved into the living room and sat down in the chair by the window, the one my husband used to call mine, though we both knew it had always belonged to whoever needed it most. The sunlight had shifted slightly, casting longer shadows now, stretching across the floor in soft, uneven patterns. I rested my hands in my lap and let the quiet settle around me. Not as an escape. Not as a pause. But as preparation. Because this time, the conversation would not be about documents or clauses or legal structures. It would be about something simpler. Something harder to navigate. The truth of what had been happening long before we ever sat down at that table. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the passing minutes without urgency. I did not rush to fill the silence. I did not rehearse what I would say. There was no need. The words would come when they were needed, the same way they always had. Outside, the light began to soften, the day easing slowly toward evening. I stood after a while and moved back into the kitchen, setting out 3 glasses on the counter. Not out of habit. Not out of hospitality. Just because it felt appropriate. Water. Not champagne. The distinction mattered. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway came just as the sky shifted toward a deeper shade of blue. I did not move immediately. I waited, listening as the engine turned off, as doors opened and closed, as footsteps approached the front door. A moment later, the doorbell rang. Clear. Simple. I walked to the door and opened it without hesitation. Daniel stood there. His posture more reserved than it had been earlier, his expression quieter, more thoughtful. Olivia stood beside him, composed as always, but not untouched. There was something different in her eyes now. Not uncertainty. Not exactly. Something more focused. More aware of the space she was stepping into. Come in, I said. They stepped inside, their movements measured, as if they were entering a place that had changed in some way they could not quite define. I closed the door behind them, the soft click echoing briefly before the house returned to its steady quiet. We can sit in the living room, I said. They followed without question, their eyes moving briefly around the space as if seeing it differently now. As if understanding, perhaps for the first time, that this was not just a property. It was a place that held something they had not fully considered. I took my seat by the window again. Daniel sat across from me. Olivia remained standing for a moment longer, then took a seat beside him. No one spoke right away. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was necessary. Because this time, there was no performance left. No assumptions to lean on. No easy words to fill the space. Only the truth of what each of us was willing to say. And what we were not. The silence in the living room did not feel fragile. It felt deliberate, like something each of us understood we could not rush through. Daniel sat forward slightly, his hands clasped together, his eyes fixed on the space between us as if searching for the right place to begin. Olivia remained still beside him, her posture composed, but there was no trace of the earlier certainty she had carried so easily. This was a different kind of room now. Not one defined by documents or signatures, but by something far less structured and far more difficult to navigate. I let the quiet stretch just long enough for it to settle fully, then I spoke. "You said you wanted to talk," I said, my voice even, steady. "So talk." Daniel exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he had been holding all day. "I should have asked you," he said. The words came out without hesitation this time. Not practiced. Not shaped. Just honest. I watched him, not interrupting, not guiding, just listening. "I should have asked you what you wanted instead of assuming I already knew," he continued. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was stepping in when you needed help. But I did not realize that stepping in meant pushing you out." The words landed quietly, but they carried weight. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were true. Olivia shifted slightly beside him, her hands resting together in her lap. She did not interrupt him. She did not correct him. She let him speak. That, in itself, was different. I nodded once, slowly. "That is closer," I said. Daniel looked up at me then, his expression steady, though there was still something uncertain beneath it. "Closer to what?" he asked. "Closer to understanding," I replied. He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded once, as if accepting that there was still more to see. Olivia spoke next, her voice controlled, but not distant. "We were trying to plan ahead," she said. "We looked at the situation logically. The house is large. The responsibilities are significant. We thought it made sense to consolidate control so that decisions could be made more efficiently." I listened to her, the same way I had listened to Daniel. Without interruption. Without judgment in my expression. Just listening. "You thought efficiency was the goal," I said. She met my gaze. "In situations like this, it often is," she replied. I shook my head slightly. "No," I said. "In situations like this, understanding is the goal. Efficiency comes after." She did not respond immediately. For a moment, her expression shifted, not defensively, but thoughtfully, as if she were considering the possibility that she had approached the entire situation from the wrong angle. Daniel glanced at her briefly, then back at me. "So what do we do now?" he asked. The question was no longer about control. It was not about the house. It was not even about the trust. It was about something much simpler. What comes next when the assumptions are gone? I leaned back slightly in my chair, my hands resting calmly in my lap. "Now," I said, "you tell me what you were planning to do with this house." Olivia's posture straightened slightly, her attention sharpening again, but not in the same way as before. There was no urgency in it. No attempt to take control of the conversation. Just focus. We're going to renovate," she said. "Update the structure. Modernize certain areas. Increase the overall value of the property." I nodded once. "For what purpose?" I asked. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Not long enough for someone untrained to notice. But I noticed. "For long-term flexibility," she said. "Possibly to refinance. Or to reposition the asset if needed." I held her gaze. "Reposition it how?" I asked. This time, the pause was longer. Daniel looked at her, then back at me. "We talked about the possibility of selling in the future," he said quietly. There it was. Not hidden. Not softened. Just said. I nodded once more. And where was I in that future? I asked. The question settled heavily between them. Olivia looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at the floor. We thought we would make arrangements, he said after a moment. Something comfortable. Something easier for you. I let the words sit there. Not rejecting them. Not accepting them. Just letting them exist for what they were. Arrangements, I repeated softly. Olivia shifted slightly, her composure holding, but not untouched. We were not trying to exclude you, she said. We were trying to manage a transition. I met her gaze steadily. You were managing a transition I did not agree to, I said. The difference was clear. And now it was fully visible. Daniel nodded slowly, as if each piece was finally connecting. We moved too fast, he said. We made decisions without you. You made decisions about me, I corrected gently. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, the weight of that realization settling into place. Olivia remained quiet for a moment longer, then spoke again, her tone more measured than before. If we had approached this differently, she said, would your answer have been different? It was a direct question. Not defensive. Not manipulative. Just direct. I considered it for a moment. Not because I did not know, but because I wanted to answer it honestly. Perhaps, I said. But not in the way you expected. She held my gaze, waiting. I would have been open to discussion, I continued. To planning. To exploring options together. But not to being replaced in my own life. The room fell quiet again. Not tense. Not heavy. Just clear. Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing the words, letting them settle without trying to reshape them. Olivia did not look away this time. She held the moment, the reality of it, without trying to move past it too quickly. And that, more than anything, told me that something had shifted. Not completely. Not permanently. But enough. Enough to change what came next. I leaned forward slightly, just enough to signal that the conversation was not over, but it had moved into something else. Something more grounded. If you want to be part of this house, I said, then you need to understand what it is before you try to change it. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. Because for the first time, they were not trying to lead the conversation. They were listening. And that was where everything would begin.